Oh, preacher man, I still hear you today. Oh, preacher man, I still hear you when you pray. Down on your knees to God in that old-fashioned way. Oh, preacher man, I still hear you today. In a little old log schoolhouse, we used it every day. Went to school 5 days a week. On Sunday, that's where we prayed. I can still hear the preacher man, for a mile he could be heard. Walking up and down the aisle, he preached the gospel word.
And welcome back to the latest episode of Presbycast. Thank you for Chortles for that stirring intro music, which always seems to just goose the conversation in exactly the direction we should take it. But this is Presbycast. Thank you to everyone who's watching live or listening in your cars. We were talking earlier about the last voice you might hear before demise, and I suppose there's a small chance if you're in your car that it could be ours. So rest assured and enjoy the rest of your drive. You can always count on us for just enough encouragement to get you to your destination.
Daily uplift.
Deep thoughts with Jack Handy level stuff. But like I said, this is Presbycast, and we've got a show and a guests, and we always really enjoy reaching across denominational lines here as the true moderates and the greater ecumenists of Presbyterianism. We here at Presbycast take our role very seriously. So I will let Chortles introduce our guests, and then we will get underway.
Well, we've got two guys that I've called, tongue-in-cheek, the ARP Dude Bros. But they are pastors and they're friends. And, let me unmute you first, Ben Glazer. I'm sure I first bumped into you online, probably on Daryl Hart's blog, or maybe on Green Baggins or somewhere, if anyone remembers that name, way back in the 2007, 8, 9, 10. Mm-hmm. And I got to meet you in person twice, once at ARP Synod, and then in your natural environment about 8 o'clock one morning last fall when I was visiting a local PCA presbytery. And Clint, he had his tie on and his dress shirt at 8 a.m.
Only way to be. Absolutely. He sleeps in it, I think. I think he gets up in the morning to sleep. In fact, I'm surprised he doesn't have one on right now.
And there's Clint Davis, his friend. And it just to keep your expectations where they should be, Clint's Twitter handle is Cletus74.
That's right.
So that's for everyone's information. So Ben, when I first met you, you had an accent unlike anyone I'd ever heard, because I'd never met anyone from West Virginia before. And
those of us from West Virginia, we like to divide ourselves up into kind of three categories. If you're from north of US 50, you're a Yankee. And if you're from east of US 119, then you're from Virginia. You're west of 119, then you're from Kentucky. And my family's originally from southeastern part of West Virginia, Greenbrier County, West Virginia. So we consider ourselves Virginians in my part of West Virginia.
All right. Well, see, that's all new to me. I've driven through the corner of West Virginia one time, but it was just fine. Looked like East Tennessee. Not surprising. So, Clint, where are you from?
I'm from Gastonia, North Carolina. So, just out west of Charlotte, and so grew up there in the west side of Gastonia, and so been there, born and raised there. Now I live in Chester, which is about an hour south. So, been in the same general area for most of my life.
So the Chester metropolitan area is where you are now.
It's humongous. All 5,500 of us.
All right. Well, that's not too bad. Now, you all are both ARP pastors, and it just so happens that you all are, you're in the general part of the world where the ARP sort of started. I don't know which of you is the historian, probably Ben, if I know anything. Tell us a little bit about the founding of the ARP and its, its pre-Revolutionary War lineage, I guess.
Right. Well, one of the things I always try to get clear with folks is, unlike our PCA and OPC brethren, we came over here already split off from mainline Presbyterians. We left the Church of Scotland in 1733, and the Associate Presbytery, of course, came over here in those days and formed themselves up. And of course, the Reformed Presbytery, our Covenanter brethren, came over about the same time. And 1782, we made the fateful decision to join with our Covenanter brethren. And as all ecclesiologists will tell you, when you try to make one denomination out of two, you make three denominations. And so the APs, the RPs, and the ARPs all kind of came into existence there in 1782. Now, those of us down here, we're really descendants of what became the ARP Synod of the South. Now, I'm the kind of person who wouldn't mind putting that of the South back on our official title. But there were basically four synods at that time. There was a synod in New York, synod of Pennsylvania, and synod of the West, or synod of the Scioto. And the northern synods started down moving towards liberalism back in the early 19th century. And the southern synods remained faithful to the old Seceder doctrines. And what I mean by that is that the Synod of the South remained faithful on exclusive psalmody, on a cappella worship, and session-controlled communion. And the northern synods started wandering away, especially on the communion issue. And so Synod of the South we didn't really break off the synods of the North. They kind of left us, eventually creating the UPCNA in 1858. But ever since then, we've been kind of hanging out down here in the Southeast. My good buddy Tim Phillips is out in Memphis, Tennessee, and I like to tell him all the time he's still out there on the frontier of the ARP, out there on the river. But we're mainly located down here in the Southeast, and Clint and I would love to see us expand outside those boundaries and eventually take over the whole nation, and eventually covenant ourselves with a national covenant of some kind.
Well, all of our listeners can rest easy, because that's going to take a while. Right. Well, would you deal with the state of Idaho too, or would you just put a fence around it and leave that alone?
Well, I know one thing about it: Idaho would be in Catawba Presbytery. That's all that really matters. Okay.
Well, yeah, that'll be your project. All right. So, we don't want to leave Clint out, but you've got an interesting story that's similar to one of our other friends. Did you not come out of the PCUSA and you went to a PCUSA seminary?
That's correct. No, I was born and raised in the PCUS, baptized in the Presbyterian in Greenbrier. And my dad was actually involved in the discussions that led to the merger in '83. And, we actually left PCUSA long after that, because my dad was concerned that the Southern Church was going to get eaten alive by the Northern Church. And of course, that's exactly what ended up happening in the PCUSA. Now, we went back when I was in junior high school, and I stayed in the USA mainly because my local church was fairly conservative, at least as those things are measured in the USA. And I eventually came under the conviction of a call to ministry. And when I did so, my pastor there in West Virginia he encouraged me to go through the process in USA, mainly because I had no idea there were other Presbyterian denominations. I was just, ignorant of that. And a lot of that's because there's just not much of a Reformed presence in the state of West Virginia. There's a handful of PCA churches. There's a couple OPC churches, one or two ARP churches, but certainly none where I was living at that time. But, we moved to Pittsburgh to go to Pittsburgh Seminary and studied under Robert Gagnon there, who was there at the time. I actually had my first seminary class with Dr. Gagnon, which was an interesting experience. Definitely set me up for failure later on because I came under the incorrect assumption that the whole faculty was like that. But he certainly was sui generis there at the seminary. Now, my basic story, how I ended up ARP, is that I had an Old Testament professor there at Pittsburgh Seminary who I will not name at this time, but he started, teaching higher criticism stuff. And of course, as I learned more about that, I started reading my Bible, and I went to him after class one day and said, what I'm reading in Scripture ain't jiving with what you're teaching, sir. And I said that honestly, didn't have any real ulterior motives in it, just was, curious what the disconnect was. And he basically told me that, that we weren't fundamentalists in the PCUSA, that we had moved past those days. We'd grown out of that childlike, mindset. And, the Holy Spirit just wasn't letting me sit still with that. Just convicted me on that. And I just knew that wasn't right. Well, we had a Sunday school teacher at First Church Pittsburgh, where Clarence McCartney was pastor at one time. And they knew the ARP pastor at Fairmount ARP in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Phil Proctor knows Tony Calley quite well. And Tony took me under his wing. And, very quickly, it became apparent that I couldn't stay at USA anymore. So they gave me the left foot of fellowship. And I gladly came under care of Northeast Presbytery in the spring of '08. And so I've been a faithful and very glad ARP now for 13 years.
So when I first came across you online about that time, you were probably cage stage. So that's why.
Very much.
That's why I'm remembering. All right. Well, so you're as they said in "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" You're bona fide. But what about Clint? Clint, what's your history with the church?
So my history with the church, I was born and raised in a Southern Baptist home. My parents were, they grew up and were married and raised their children in the same Baptist church. And we were a part of that till I was 11 years old, and we left and joined the ARP church at that time. And really two main reasons, neither of them deeply theological, but two main reasons. One, my brother was one of two youth his age in the church. He was 3 years older than me, and or than I was. And I was the only child my age. So I went to Sunday school and training union. My grandmother taught me in Sunday school and training union every Sunday. And it was just me. And so we went through that. And then the big issue, my dad was a deacon in the church. And this particular Southern Baptist church was very strict on its position on ordination of men to serve. And there was two men in the church who were very qualified, who were widowers and had remarried. They had been faithful to their wives. Wives had died. Then they remarried, and they were not allowed to serve as a deacon in that church, which just still blows my mind. And I remember my dad standing up on the floor at the congregational meeting saying, "This isn't right," And so we left because of that. And ARP Church, a quarter mile from my house. My dad did some summer work there. He was a handyman, and so got to know the pastor. And I joined when I was 11, and I've been an ARP ever since. So went to NC State University. I got the call to ministry and was going to go to a Southern Baptist seminary. Actually, going to go to Southeastern because that Raleigh area. I loved it up there, and had a lot of friends involved with Providence Baptist Church when I was in college, and ended up going to Erskine Seminary because my home pastor, a guy named Neely Gaston, was actually moderator of Synod, needed somebody to help him as a pastoral intern in Greenville, asked me to come do it. And then Erskine was free at the time for me. So I went to Erskine Seminary. That was really a no-brainer. It's absolutely free. In those days, we call that the golden age of Erskine Seminary, but it was free. And so that was a no-brainer. And, so that's how I got there and came to Chester in 2005 and been here ever since. So I've been an ARP longer than most people have been ARPs in the modern era.
Well, that's good, and you've been. It's impressive having been at one church for that amount of time. And Ben, how long have you been at your church? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me unmute you. I asked you a question. I muted you, so let's. I didn't want you to step on. I didn't want you to step on Clint because I know you would. So, how long have you been there?
I've been at Bethany for 3 years.
3
Before
years.
I came here to Bethany, I was. It's kind of a interesting story. I spent about 18 months working at FedEx Freight out of seminary. It was the best job I ever had in my life. FedEx is a great company to work for. Love driving forklift. I like working outdoors. I'm not much of an indoor cat. One night while I was working, I got a call from Mississippi. And needless to say, I didn't know where Ellisville, Mississippi was. But I took the call, and elder down there at church asked me if I'd be interested in candidating, and I said sure. So within a week, I got on a plane and flew to Ellisville, Mississippi. And within a week after that, they had sent a call. Well, one of the unique things about that situation was Ellisville had been a PCA church, had gone independent, and were now seeking affiliation with ARP. And so I was ordained out of bounds by Northeast Presbytery to serve this church in Ellisville, Mississippi, and to shepherd them into the ARP, which they eventually did join the ARP. And I then joined Mississippi Valley Presbytery at that time. But that would have been 2010. And then I came up here in October of 2017.
Okay. Well, I've been to your church. That's where I came to see you. And it's got some history. But before we talk about that, I know you all are about 35 miles apart, but if I'm not mistaken, Ben, within about, if I drew a 5-mile radius around your church, there are a couple ARP and 2 or 3 PCA churches.
Yeah.
Just in a, let's say, a 10-mile circle.
Oh, yeah.
There aren't many places in the world like that.
No, most certainly not. I mean, you can cut it down to 5 miles. Within 5 miles of me, there are 5 ARP churches and 3 or 4 PCA churches.
And most of them are good churches too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Even the PCA churches are good.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So Robert Cathcart pastors that church where I was at the seminary that day. He's a good guy, and I don't know the other ones. But so what's it? I mean, when I think of a rural area, having been born in Northeast Arkansas, growing up in the Boot Hill, Missouri, living in I lived in Raleigh for a while, Clint, and then here in East Tennessee. When you talk rural church, it's Baptist first. And then depending on where you are, there may be Church of Christ, like in Arkansas, would be number 2. In Raleigh, it would be a mixture of different Baptist churches. And here, you'd have a few charismatics thrown in. But when I think rural church...
I was going to say, we've got a Methodist church.
Yeah, probably, well, I'm not even counting those.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a Methodist church. They don't count. But when I think rural church, I think Baptist. But you're in one of those, maybe one of the few areas. They're in, North Carolina, South Carolina. That was the ARP area where maybe there's nearly as many Presbyterians as there are Baptists. What is that like? Because that would be the weirdest sensation to me.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about that, in my mind, is that when folks are looking for a local church around here, they do not need to they have a background in infant baptism that was definitely not present in the context I was in Mississippi. You know, they would come to Ellisville and they'd have some idea about predestination election. You know, they'd be Calvinist, a particular Baptist of some stripe. But here, you know, we've grown during all this COVID mess, and part of that has been because, you know, folks have been looking for a faithful Presbyterian church that's meeting, and
Yep.
so
Yep.
that's been a unique thing that, you know, I certainly was not experiencing in Mississippi. And also, there's some familiarity around here with the ARP. You know, one of the things in Mississippi, and I'm sure this is true in you know, and especially our churches in Tennessee and Alabama, is we kind of have to make sure people understand we're not those Presbyterians, and that's really not the case around here. Not just because there aren't that many USA churches. I mean, there's 2 USA churches within 10 miles of me. But as you said, you know, there's a dozen faithful, confessionally reformed Presbyterian churches in that same area. And so that's really unique, really anywhere in the United States for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just I was struck by it when I was there, and I just knew, you know, as we talked, you were telling me about the history of your church, and you were referring to churches 3 miles away, and I just come from a PCA church about 1.5 miles or 2 away, and I thought this is different, for sure.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, that's one of the unique things about Bethany is we're a mother church, and you know, without branching off too far. You know, we have about 18 churches that have come out of Bethany. We were founded in 1797, and we've had some people don't like it when I use this phrase, but we've had daughters of the field and daughters of the house come out of us. But you know, that's you know, pretty big legacy when you think about, you know, the planning of local churches. You know, not just ARP. You know, we've had a couple of USA churches come out of us. Because,
yeah, you were telling me about that. I said I passed this church, you know, 5 miles away, and you said, yeah, that came out of our church. Now, you were also telling me that some of these splits had to do with psalm singing in earlier centuries or decades.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was the USA church that's within 200 yards of us. Came out of Bethany in 1948-ish, 52-ish, in that area, because that's when the ARP started allowing the use of uninspired hymns in worship. And Bethany wanted to remain EP, and a sizable minority within the church wanted to sing hymns. And you know, that was the avenue that group chose in order to sing hymns, was to you know, found their own church nearby. Now, of course,
Good people.
like with all church folk, there's a lot more going on there, but that was the precipitating issue that led to the split.
All right, Clint.
Yeah, I remember. I think the first time I like just saw how many PCA and ARP churches, I think I forget when it happened, but when Kevin DeYoung left East Lansing and moved to Charlotte to be a, you know, professor at RTS in Charlotte, and I remember, you know, him taking, you know, a rather large pastorate there, and I remember Ben, you know, remarking about just how many other, you know, smaller churches there were, ARP, PCA, in the area that could have, you know, benefited from a call accepting like that. But and then I do all my main research on church locations from Google Maps. It's where I'll rephrase. It's where the Lord has taught me where our 2 most recent churches that we've ever been members of. That's how I learned of their presence. But yeah, I mean, if you do sort of a greater Charlotte into South Carolina area for, you know, just type in the letters PCA or ARP or even Presbyterian, I mean, you're not ready for many. You see it, like Troll said, is you're used to it being Baptist churches in that quantity, let alone the quality that's also there.
Absolutely.
All right. So
That's closest I'm going to get to complimenting Charlotte. I mean, it's about all I have. So that's as close as you're going to get.
Well, there are a lot of churches down here, a lot of good churches down here. But when I was growing up, I grew up in Gastonia, right outside of Charlotte, and when I was growing up, there were a lot more good churches. I mean, the Charlotte influence is really starting to take its toll, and not in a good way as it filters out and it grows out. People come here, and so. But yeah, so there are a lot, but there used to be a lot more. There's some really good Baptist churches too. That's the way it is in our county.
So here's the question. I was going to ask Ben this, but I probably couldn't trust him to give me a straight answer. He'd spin it, But does it change the culture of even a rural area when there are that many Reformed churches around? I mean, because I've never lived anywhere like that.
Ben would be the guy to answer, because in Chester County, it's historically Baptist churches out in the county. There are a few PCA churches, old historic Presbyterian churches, but and most of them have remained relatively conservative, but they're dwindling in size. The Baptist churches in the county, there's only 3 Reformed churches within 4 or 5 miles of my church. So Ben would be the guy.
That's still pretty good.
Yeah,
yeah.
2 PCA at my church.
So Ben, does it change the culture? I mean,
well, I think,
is it different?
Historically, yes, but the problem around here right now in Clover, South Carolina, is we probably doubled our population in the last 4 years.
Oh, really?
We're probably going to double our population in the next 5 years.
Now, is that bedroom? Is that as a bedroom community?
Yes. What's happening here in Clover, it's not so much the Yankees coming in here. What's happening in this part of Charlotte is people are flip-flopping sides of the city. So native North Carolinians in Huntersville, Harrisburg, that part of Charlotte are coming down to South Carolina to get away from, Comrade Cooper and the People's Republic of North Carolina, and are taking advantage of the free state of South Carolina and the much cost
and lower taxes.
So that's changing our area quite a bit. So it's it's dispersing what used to be a much more cohesive community.
So soon you'll be having those art walks and bistro crawls and
yes.
And then you'll have a little city to transform.
Right. Well, I tell you, one thing that's going to change around here is a little birdie told me yesterday that Elevation is actually looking at bringing a satellite campus into our area. And now
they're everywhere.
I mean, that's something about, obviously Charlotte itself. You're starting to see a lot of a growth of those type of churches in our area. They're kind of sucking up a lot of energy in this general part of York County, and I'm interested to see how that changes some things around here, church wise.
Yeah, and Elevation, of course, is Stephen Furtick Incorporated. That's so really, that's probably the biggest influence on the religious culture in your part of the country now, just because how big and ubiquitous they are. Clint, are you sort of you probably lean a little more Elevation than Ben, right?
I'm all about the music, Elevation worship in my playlist all the time. So, but no, we have a very different situation. It's funny, we're one county south, but we have a very different influx of Charlotteans as Charlotte gentrifies. The folks that they're moving out of lower income homes that have been bought up and changed and transformed in neighborhoods are looking for cheaper housing. And so they're coming to places like Chester, little small rural towns. And so that has changed drastically the makeup of our little town. And it's a very different place. And the population's very different than it once was. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Charlotte and Columbia, but Charlotte in particular, is gentrifying, and people are being forced out, looking for good, affordable housing. And they come south, and they got to pass Rock Hill because it's a bedroom community now. And so they come to Chester. And so it's changed drastically here as well, but it's for a different reason. We're not going to have any bar crawls. I can promise you that. No art walks in downtown Chester anytime soon.
Okay, well, no New York money for you, I guess. That's all right. So, what does it look like when elevation collides with the rural areas? I'll be honest. I went to, of course, we haven't been in for about a year, but my church goes into the local prison, and we've got a long history of prison ministry out there. And I had this training session I had to go to, and it was at this little church in a town of about the size of yours, Clint, about 5,000. And it was an old Baptist church. And when you drive by it, the hint is that they've painted all the windows black. So they've become. That one, or it was an old school that they converted, but they have the blacked out windows, and you go into their worship space, and even though this is in East Tennessee, small town, it's like you took a mega church, a contemporary mega church, and just shrunk it, and you couldn't see anything in there because the walls were black, and they didn't have the light show going, And, they had iPads and little kiosks so you could give. And they had a little coffee bar, and that was the saddest little coffee bar I've ever seen. It was about 4 feet wide. But they were doing the whole megachurch, contemporary elevation, Saddleback, Willowbrook model as best they could in this tiny town with a bunch of rednecks. And, maybe it's working, but I would have never dreamed that would work. What do you see when the contemporary is tried in a little place like where you live?
Surprisingly, I think with the advent of technology and the ability that people have to go, to get 25 minutes to Rock Hill, which is the larger city from Chester, and that's where Elevation has a campus there. And so they'll go there, and then they bring that back. And so we've got a number of our Baptist churches out in the county in particular who are trying that and who are doing different things. And it's interesting that people tend to flock there. And I often wondered why. And I don't really know why, other than just the accessibility to the elevation style of worship, accessibility to, encountering that stuff online through podcast or through videos, and people tend to like it. And so they're kind of flocking there. A lot of churches are pretty wide and not very deep, but it's interesting. I'm with you. I would have thought especially out in the counties, it wouldn't have been as popular as it has been, but it has been pretty popular. Now, the interesting thing around here is, I'll be careful what I say because it's public, but the interesting thing around here is that there's a group of people that just moved to the hottest new church that do that. And so, they started at Elevation. Now they're at the church out here, and then they'll move to the other side of the county. Then they'll move to the next one once they kind of get a little momentum going. So, I don't know how serious or how, I shouldn't say serious. I don't know how real a lot of that growth is in those churches because a lot of people tend to move around place to place. But yeah, it's really surprising to me. But I think a lot of it has to do with the accessibility of that technology brings to people, and they like that feel. They like that. They think they're supposed to. You know what I mean? I think it's that they think they're supposed to worship that way because they see Furtick on TV, or they see, and they used to see Perry Noble, but Now, Clayton Keys kind of got that ship going in a better direction at New Spring, but they see that and they think that that's what they should be doing. And they think they're supposed to like that. It's a new thing. And it's not what their mom and dad did. It's not what their grandparents did. It's not the old. It's something new.
Well, you mentioned technology, and I can tell you, I've been there. Ben's church has something that no technology can give you.
That's correct.
It smells like a church. It smells like an old church with red carpet, and it's delightful. And when I visited, the thing that was it kind of gave me flashbacks to the little Baptist church that I grew up in the Boot Hill, Missouri, which might as well have been Arkansas because it hangs down into Arkansas. I'm sure, Ben, you don't call those little bump outs on the side of the building anything so grand as transepts, which is what they are. But you've got those, you got the perpendicular seating on the side of the building, and that's where my family sat as when I was a kid, in a church of about that size and shape. Although your church was much more appealing and much nicer than the one I grew up in. So maybe that's a draw. The church that smells and looks like a church. Do you spray that stuff, Ben, or is it just come?
Well, I was going to say I have bottles of it for sale for $9.99 for handling. If you'd like to drop a line on my Discord after this is over.
Will you also pray over it?
Of course. I'll sprinkle a little oil on it too.
Thank you. Thank you. Our church building was built in 1897, so we're not as old as Ben, but our building was in 1897. Our church was founded in 1869. We've seen our church go through cycles like this, people kind of come in and they get excited about something new, and then they kind of wander back to what was old and had a history and has a grounding and has a presence in their life. And so, we recognize that a lot of people still want that. They look for that, and it's still very appealing, especially in a traditional town setting, which, a lot of the churches in town don't do the mega church type thing. And most of us are pretty traditional, and God's blessed us greatly. So we're thankful for that. But you're right. I want to be somewhere that looks like what I grew up in and has some history, and I want to go where there's a ceiling that draws me upward toward heaven, and really makes me think about what I'm there to do. So I think a lot of people still do too.
Well, Resby had to step away. He didn't hear us talking about elevation and your proximity, both of your proximities to that. If somebody comes to your church and that's what they know, do you have to teach them about worship? Do you explain as you go? Do people just are they confused or what?
Yeah, in my experience, it depends a lot on their age. The older boomer age people who are coming down off of the elevation, no pun intended, are coming down. They are coming to our church specifically because they are tired of the light show and all that kind of stuff. And
do they have hearing damage? Do they have hearing damage? So
yeah, well,
you have
that's not too good at our church because I'm loud, so that probably didn't help their hearing damage. But with the younger folk who have been born and raised and gone to the non-denominational big box Walmart kind of church, there is a lot of just basic terminology stuff that you have to walk them through. What's a call to worship? What's a benediction? Why do you do this? Why do you not do that? Where is this in your service? And one of the things I find helpful in that is to take their questions seriously. Treat it with the respect that it deserves. I think some of the problems sometimes Reformed folk have when it comes to worship is we talk down to people who don't have any experience at all with ordinary means of grace worship. And it's almost like when you're trying to teach your kid how to tie their shoes, right? You don't throw them shoes and get mad at them because they don't know what to do with them, right? You got to sit down with them, and you got to make the loop-de-loop and do all that kind of stuff. And and so that's a necessary part of helping them see the richness of simplicity. Show them the depth of of the ordinary means. But yeah, with the older folks, they already know the terms and everything. And so they kind of know what's going on. But like I said, the younger folks, especially young adults who are with young children, who don't understand why we don't have children's church, who don't understand why we think young children can hear and understand preaching. You just kind of have to, like I said, just be gentle with them. Maybe provide a little children's church. I know that's heresy to some people, but kind of.
You mean part of the worship, right?
Right. Yeah. Not a separate whole thing, but enculturate them into that world. And I've found, at least in my personal experience, if you do that, you're not going to run people off by being cultish almost with your ordinary means of grace worship.
Yeah, I think my experience is a little different than Ben's in the sense of, our church is a little bit more liturgical, historically liturgical than maybe Bethany would be. But I think I learned, Dr. Mark Ross taught me this in seminary, and I've since, he did this when he was leading worship at First Presbyterian Church in Columbia as an associate there. And I do this regularly at different ports as we do worship, to pick out a particular part of worship. So why do we, and make a statement about, explain, we're going to call to worship. God's calling us to worship, or we're going to sing a hymn of praise first because we're going to praise God first. And then we affirm our faith later. And so we kind of work through it and educate people. And I find that people, even people that grew up in it, may know that language. They know benediction, but they don't know why you do it. And so I think that's been a very helpful thing. And then I think with reference to younger folks, the folks that love our church they love the authentic relationships. That's a big buzzword, not so much anymore, but authenticity, the authentic relationships. And they just want something real. They're tired of the show. They might like the music better at the show, but they want something deep. They want something real. They want something that they can grab a hold of that's going to actually sustain them through the day. And that's what we provide. Not that you can't provide that in the show, for sure. You can do that. But it's important, I think, that what we find is that people want something more rooted, more grounded, that's going to carry them through the week ahead and help them as they grow in their relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, and I think I think my wife would strongly agree with that. We went sort of like a pretty uniformly aged suburban Presbyterian church, before we came to our smaller OPC Virginia bordering church. And I know for her, it's the diversity of ages that we talk to on a Sunday. And we've been fortunate to be able to meet in person since, basically the week before Memorial Day. But just all of a sudden, rather than just talking to, me or the kids or her coworkers through the computer, but now all of a sudden having everyone from small children all the way up to, retirees or maybe even looking even beyond that, has just been invaluable, as a reason why we've loved our church and stayed in it. And you're right. I think people, maybe the show works for a little while.
Right.
I think there's probably somewhat of a decent case. It's probably partly what kept me in church in college. But at the same time, once you get out, you realize there's a lot more than just sort of this place you lived for 4 years while you got your bachelor's degree. And you start to seek out something more. But I guess my follow-up, especially on like people coming from like different church backgrounds to y'all, and I'm pretty sure I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways because it's in our wheelhouse. But like, how much do you find that like pastoral visitation helps build those relationships and just familiarity with coming into a Reformed Presbyterian denomination?
Well, yeah, I remember in Ellisville, we had a young family come to the church, and I went to their house and visited with them and talked to them about everything under the sun. I mean, we probably sat and talked 2.5, 3 hours. And as I prayed and got ready to leave, the mom, the wife, had tears in her eyes, and me, I'm thinking, what in the world did I say? Make this lady cry, because that was the first time I've made a woman cry. But she looked up at me and she's like, you've spent more time with me than any pastor I've ever had. And I don't mean that disparage her pastors or anything, but what her point is that there just wasn't that level of care at the big box churches that she was used to. There was a guy who was up on stage every Sunday morning, and he preached, and he probably preached 1,000 times better than I can, but he didn't know 90% of the people in the audience. And having those relationships with people within the local church, you just can't be beat. Knowing what's going on when you're preaching and you see somebody sitting in the pew, that they've had trouble all week with their spouse, or they've had trouble at work, or they're suffering with an illness or whatever's going on. That changes everything about the relationship you have with people within the church. And you just can't do that at big box churches. It's just logistically impossible. I mean, I know, Richard Baxter was famous for visiting everybody in Kidderminster every year, but that just ain't normal, right? That ain't ordinary. But like I said, having that ability to sit down and talk with people and visit with them and know what's going on, just really changes how people see the importance of the local church. And that's something unique, I think, in our circles.
Well, so here's a question. I don't know how it is where you are, but here, about the only churches that practice anything that resembles church discipline would be Reformed churches. Most people that have come from Baptist churches don't know anything about church discipline, and don't get the seriousness with which membership is taken. Do you all find you have trouble with that in some cases?
Yes, I'll answer that question first. I'm Johnny on the spot on that. Yes, I think we do have a challenge with that. Our church does a lot of informal, quote, discipline. We will address things informally with each other and those kind of things. But, I think part of that's the Southern culture, not just coming from a different background. I think part of it's just our Southern culture. You don't want to get too much involved in people's lives and the negative. You stay on the positive. And so we wrestle with that. I think part of it, too, is a general, and we see this more and more now with as generations come of age. I think there's just a general lack of commitment to the institution. And as much as I don't like to think of a church as an institution, there are institutional institutional components to being a church where you have a body of people, you have a ministry, you have to give, you have to tithe, you have to be a part of it, you have to come, and those kind of things. And so I think there's a general distrust. And so one of our challenges is with some of our younger folks is getting them to understand the importance of honoring those commitments, and how do we do that? And of course, these generations didn't get this out of the sky. It was passed down to them, and they learned it from somewhere. And so we have challenges with that. Are we as struggle with it as much as some other denominations? I don't know. I just know we as a congregation sometimes struggle with that, is building those relationships and actually coming down and saying, no, you need to be a part of the church. Not just we miss you at church, we love you, we want you to come, but no, you actually have vowed to be a part of it. And I struggle with that. I mean, that starts at the top and works its way down. So yeah, we have a hard time with it.
Well, and the lack of discipline in a lot of country churches and Baptist churches, I think, is because, in a very ignorant way, discipline was done poorly in previous decades and even centuries. I mean, when I was still a Southern Baptist, someone pulled out the records from the early 1900s, and basically, the synopsis was, so-and-so was seen coming out of a beer joint on Saturday night, and we kicked him out of the church on Sunday morning. And
right. And
there was a reaction against that.
Yeah, there's a fear of being a fundamentalist, very much so, and people in our community have been hurt by that. And, I'll never forget when I was candidating at our church, one of the members of the pulpit committee had said that he had been to visit a family member in a community church out in our county. It was a Baptist church, but they brought somebody forward and read them the riot act because they up in front of everybody because they had gotten a girlfriend pregnant and all this other stuff, and it was really, really poorly done. And this person was asking me what I thought of it. And it was part of the candidating process because it was just very, very poorly done. And so I think those stories certainly make their way around towns and relationships. Everybody knows somebody. And as a result of that, it's been done very poorly. There's a fear of being a fundamentalist. There's fear of that kind of stuff.
Well, unbiblical rules, legalism, making things up, and then not following the biblical discipline process. It should be no surprise that people are going to get turned off and hurt and injured and run away. But I often say that, anytime there's church discipline, you never do it exactly right, and you never think you did it. It always could have been done better. It's just a minefield, and anyone who's been involved with it knows it. But you can kind of tell when people are trying to do it the right way. And when they care about you. Well, I was going to ask you these questions. What's the upside to pastoring rural churches? What are the challenges? We pretty much covered them, most of them. Surprisingly, one of the challenges is the encroachment of the contemporary megachurch. But what are some other upsides and downsides of being at a small church in a rural area? I mean, I can probably think of a couple. I mean, I know the social problems that exist in a rural area, but what are some of the struggles and some of the good things we haven't talked about?
Well, I don't know as much about Clints Church. So this may be true at Chester as well, but one of the huge blessings that also can be at times a discouragement in its own way is we're one of these country churches that has about 5 last names. And you go out in the cemetery and you see those 5 last names, and you go and you look at the founding elders here at Bethany and you see those same 5 last names. And so a family church where if I looked right now at the membership list here at Bethany, we have 104 on the rolls. I would venture to guess 96 of that 104 are related in some way. And, that's a wonderful blessing. And that's a great, great thing. But there can be a difficulty in making a clear delineation between what is family and what is church. What is a family issue and what is a church issue? And that's a very thorny minefield to walk around. And there's not always an easy way to handle that.
Yeah, and it makes discipline hard.
Right. Yeah. Because when you're dealing with a discipline case, you might be dealing with somebody with an elder's brother or child or whatever. And those relationships, are difficult. I only have to see these people once a week. He has to go and live with them, right? And so, but 9 times out of 10, I mean, that's a wonderful blessing, to have that intergenerational family ministry here at Bethany. And that's a wonderful thing. But like I said, that can definitely provide challenges.
Yeah, our church is different than being on that. We're a town church, and we've historically been a church where the professional leaders of the town attended. And so our situation is, and the great challenge we have is that we raise up children. We feel very blessed to be able to do that. And then we send them out, and you can, I've been here for almost 17 years now. So this group's getting ready to graduate from high school. I've known since they were, before they were 1 year old. And as we have been able to invest in their lives and hope to disciple them and encourage them and take them on mission trips and lead them, we also recognize that when they go off to college, they probably won't come back here. I think that for us, it's been a hard thing because since I've been here, we've graduated from high school with over 50 kids. We have 5 or 6 that have returned here. And so it's really hard for us at this point to not replicate, not to continue the growth of the church just by people coming back, being raised in the church and being members of the church and being involved in the church, because they have gone to find opportunity elsewhere. And I completely understand that, support that 100%, recognize that in a town like ours, there are no entry-level positions. There are no, places that are exciting for them to have jobs and opportunities. And if they do work at one of our factories out at the interstate, which is 10 miles from town, they're going to live in the larger city because they have more to do. We don't, we get 5 or 6 restaurants. So I understand it. That's the great challenge, though. That's the greatest challenge we face. It's hard in pastoral ministry because you invest in these people and then you realize, that they're not coming back most likely. But it's also a blessing because you get to train them up and send them off to be churchmen and women elsewhere. And hopefully they'll get involved in other churches and be elders and deacons and good mothers and good wives and Sunday school teachers and servants of the Lord and raise children in the ways of truth and be great professionals wherever they live to the glory of God. So, it's positive and negative, but that's the hardest part. But that's not just true for our church. That's true for our town.
No,
We've lost our best human. We lose our best human resources, and then we wonder why we can't get good leadership. Well, we're educating them out. I understand it. I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, well, even when like my church is pretty highly educated, being near Oak Ridge National Laboratory and University of Tennessee and all that sort of thing. But when you raise your kids up and they're national merit scholars or they're homeschooled and they're highly capable, well, they're going to go to school at an Ivy League or one step down from that. And if you're going to be a molecular biology researcher, you're not even coming back here.
Right.
So you can educate them out of an educated area in church too. I think a lot of parents don't think about that, but I'm not sure. It's one of those things we think we could maybe strategize it, but I think we have to depend on the sovereignty of God and just see what happens sometimes on that.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that they, and I think it's natural. I mean, I didn't want to stay in my hometown. I wanted to go somewhere else, and I think that's natural. And, I think some of our folks will come back to raise children eventually. But, I had a guy who works for, a firm that works with the government and helps put computer software into managing governmental systems and stuff like that. Well, I mean, how's he going to turn that down? That's in D.C. Go do it and have a great time. I get it 100%.
Yeah. Well, so we have plenty in common.
It's funny you say that, not necessarily want to go home. When I graduated high school, Pocahontas County High School in 1998, I joined the Marine Corps, and I've spent the last 22 years trying to figure out how I can get back to Pocahontas County, West Virginia. But But missions agencies aren't as keen on planting churches in rural hamlets like Greenbank and Cass and Marlinton. Much to my chagrin, but not that I'm looking to go anywhere, Bethany. But
listen, I've adopted South Carolina. I'm not going anywhere. I was a Carolinian all my life, but I just didn't know the beauty of South Carolina.
Well, so I think now we want to talk about we want to get to the fun part of the program. I didn't take a picture of this and tweet it or anything when I visited Ben's church, but when I pulled up to his church, parked out next to the church in the church parking lot, there was a truck and there was a fishing boat hooked up to it, and I'm not sure that it was Ben's, but I think it might have been.
I wish it was mine.
It wasn't yours?
No, but the one of the teachers over here, we have an elementary school right across the street from my church, and one of the teachers over there goes fishing every night and will park their car with the boat in our parking lot.
When I saw that.
That's just stone cold efficiency. I mean, you don't even have to go home.
Well,
you just...
That's the rural life. So when I saw that, I think I even sent Resby a message. I said I didn't take a picture of it, but I'm pretty sure Ben has parked his fishing boat at the church. And I said, which is fine, but it's interesting. But it wasn't you. Okay.
I might try to get that in the budget next year.
At this any day now, I expect Ben to put a deer stand somewhere behind the building or something. You looked like you had pretty good luck this year.
Oh yeah. No, I got
he was providentially favored, Resby.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the other nice thing about a rural congregation is that we have some cattle farmers in our church who have quite a bit of land around here, and that provides a plentiful opportunity to harvest God's creatures into my preaching.
Yep, and the thing of it is, it's the sign that they like you and respect you, because just because they have a bunch of land doesn't mean they're going to let you on it just because you're the preacher.
That is true.
We've got a Baptist pastor nearby, and nobody likes him because of the way he hunts. I have a couple nearby relatives who say, like, I couldn't sit under that man knowing how he just put his stand right up on this other guy's on the property, and it's become this nice little feud going on about deer stand locations.
That's an interesting thing. I don't hunt. I don't eat deer. I don't hunt. I just not my thing. And I do fish some, but I don't want. That's catch and release. I'm just not into all that. But I do play a lot of golf, or I used to till I had kids, and it's interesting, stuff like hunting, the way you play golf. People watch that, and there's a local minister who is now gone on to his eternal reward. But a lot of people had issues with him because of the way he, used the eraser on the golf course. And I'm sitting there thinking
he did that with his baptism numbers too. Now, come on,
exactly. And I'm sitting there going, I mean, this is you're testifying to Christ on the golf course and the way how honest you are. I mean, it's just. Right. We've got to. People have to remember that kind of stuff. That's why I don't put stickers on my car like the God sticker or the little church sticker, because I don't drive at a good enough way to be a testimony to Christ.
Yeah, I've had that same thought. Don't need to be advertising on the car,
because usually the size of the sticker is inversely proportional to the quality of their driving too.
That's correct.
So that's either in quantity or just in general size of the decals. The bigger or more plural they are, you're getting cut off imminently.
Jesus loves you. I'm about to make you wreck.
Yeah. You're about to meet him and find out how much.
Yeah. Now Ben's gonna agree with me on this. That one of the problems is we've got these pastors who think they're omnicompetent and they know how to do everything. They're going to fix the city and the arts, and they're going to be on the Chamber of Commerce and all that sort of thing. But Ben, what do you say to a pastor who who calls high school football games on the radio. I mean, is he trying to take over everything? Do you know anybody like that?
Well, I mean, he's a state champion, so
Yes.
that says it all right there. I told I've shared this with you before, but if you pull out in my driveway and park your car south on Friday nights, you can hook up to 90.3 and listen to good old Chester Cyclone football. And old Clint gets up on the mic, and it's when I was a kid, you get up on top of a mountain in West Virginia, you could listen to baseball come in from KMOX in St. Louis, and WGN in Chicago, and WLW in Cincinnati, and KDK out of Pittsburgh. And I put Clint right up there with Jack Book and with Marty Brenneman, Harry Carey, all those guys. He's a talented fella.
Well, I was lurking his Twitter account. I saw some praise out there for Nance and Romo calling football, and I fully agree. Is in the commentary world. Now we can get into this later. I'm a Joe Buck fan. I like Joe Buck a lot.
Right.
But there is no greater breath of fresh air to a commentary booth than Tony Romo has been with his inability to whisper or show any sort of ebb and flow in volume. It is all go, no slow all of the time, and I just love it.
Yeah, I love it. The thing I love about Romo is that he diagrams the play for you like a quarterback would. And I think that's just fantastic. That football thing's interesting. When I moved to Chester, the guy who did high school football in Chester for 46 years was a guy named Carlisle Roddy. And he was a member of our church. And I moved here, I was single. And he said, he called me Big Boy. He said, "Hey, look, Big Boy, we're going to a ball game. We want you to go with us." And so the first game of the year, I jumped in the truck. And I was like, sure, I've got nothing to do on Friday nights. And so I started just going along. I was toting gear, putting up antennas, pointing out stuff. And within a year, I was on the microphone doing stats and halftime. And then it became a Carlisle and Clint show. We had a ball. And he was just that old homespun guy who would say stuff like, "That boy out there, look at him. He's so bow-legged he couldn't hem up a hog in a ditch," stuff like that. And he would say stuff, and I would wonder how we would get out of the stadium stuff where, he knew everybody, and he was the county supervisor. He's an old boss hog type politician, so he knew everybody. And I'd say, "That's a big old boy out there." He said, "Yeah, he's big. His daddy's big. His mama's big. His grandma's big. His granddaddy's big." He would just say that kind of stuff, and he got away with it. Well, I did it with him for 12 years, and then he got sick, and on a Wednesday, he had to go in the hospital. The ball game was on Friday, first game of the season a couple years ago, and he said, "You got it." And I've been doing it since. He's now gone home to be with the Lord, but that was a tough funeral. And that was the hardest funeral I ever did. I cried like a baby. That just kind of fell in my lap. I absolutely adore it. My wife is good enough to let me do it every week, and we have a ball. One of the highlights of my life was calling a state championship game from Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia. We won 2 years ago, which is awesome. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to tell you the truth. Where I used to live in a small community of probably about 500, they had their football program was Class A. This was a K-12 school with 500 students total, and in the county that I lived in, there were about 3 or 4 of these Class A schools, so it was a huge deal. And the guy who did the local radio broadcast, he used to lead the singing at the Baptist church. And the funny, this may be you, I don't know. Every year, about August, he'd tell us, "I'm going to retire. This is my last year. This is my last year." Well, he never did. And then his second banana, his color commentator, he did retire once. And at every game that year, every school gave him an award and a standing ovation, and he came back 2 years later. So, I bet he won't get another farewell tour, but
I know a little bit.
I know a little bit about this culture, and my dad was a high school basketball and baseball coach, so I grew up around that.
Yeah, I love it. You know, we're on the radio on Sunday mornings as well, and so people say, "I love to hear you on the radio," and I say, you know, I always am cautious and say, "When do you listen?" You know, Sunday morning, Friday night. But it's great. Yeah, it's wonderful. I have no desire to retire from that. The only time I'll retire from that is if I leave this town. So I love it.
So, well, and so you don't view that as a ministry. You view that as just a community, common grace sort of thing.
Oh, right? Yeah, that's not a ministry. I mean, it gets you connect to people, and people know you from that, and they might be able to be more willing to tune into something you do. But no, I mean, nobody's come to church because of that. I invite people, obviously, on the radio. Hey, we'll be there on church on Sunday. But no, I don't. It's not a ministry. It's just I just kind of, my philosophy on ministry is, you know, there's certain things you do, pastoral ministry, preaching, those kind of things at the church, but as a whole, you just live your life as a Christian and try to connect to people best you can. Just be a normal Christian out in the community, and that's what I would do if I had that opportunity. So, yeah.
Well, that's one of our live viewers said that there's a Church of Christ pastor in their area that does the same thing, but I'll bet you're a little looser than the Church of Christ pastor.
Yeah, it gets wild. It gets wild.
I saw you on the ARP Synod live stream this summer, and I remember thinking to myself, he'd be good on Presbycast, and then I found out that you and Ben were buddies, and been looking forward to this since that time.
I've been looking forward to it too. I appreciate you inviting us. It's awesome.
Well, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of, because you and Ben are friends. Mm-hmm. And all pastors have friends of some sort. A lot of times, especially with Reformed guys, Presbyterian, your best friend is 300 miles away or 100 miles away or the other end of the presbytery or something like that. But I'd like to hear you all talk a little bit about the importance of pastoral fellowship, pastoral friendship. And of course, the presbytery is one thing, but how important it is just to have friends, pastor friends, as you all are.
Yeah, this is something that when I was in Mississippi, the closest ARP church to me was about 3.5 hours away, and I would drive 6 hours to Presbyterian meetings, and that was the only time I got to see other ARPs was at Presbytery, and we'd hold it over 2 days just to kind of help out with travel and that kind of thing, and then I go back to Ellisville and I kind of be by myself, and coming up here to to Bethany and being here in Clover, I have lunch every week with a fellow you should probably have on sometime, Mark J. Miller. And he, it's just a blessing to be able to sit there and talk shop, talk to somebody about what's going on. Yeah, because one of the things about ministry, and I don't want to make myself sound like a poor mouth or something, but it can be pretty daggone lonely at times. And one of the illustrations I've used before when I'm talking to younger ministers is that when you're dealing with your congregation, you kind of have an inverse time relationship. For you, the congregation is 95% of your time. That's your focus. That's what you're thinking about all the time. That's what you're praying about. You're concerned about people, and you're thinking about things. And the reality is that you're about 5% of their time. And so you can get yourself kind of all in a weird headspace in that. And so having ministers that you can, meet with and pray with and talk to, it's kind of just, it's without measure. Now, in God's blessings, both in Mississippi and here in South Carolina, I purposely sought out a non-ARP prayer group and local ministers that I can sit down and pray with And here, I go, pretty much every Thursday morning and meet with several Assembly of God guys, and we have a good old time, praying together, talking about ministry, things going on, and it's a real blessing to be able to do that. But like I said, it's real nice to have local ARP guys I can go hang out with and eat some good food, and eat some collard greens and pinto beans and fried chicken and all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like that you had some of those collard greens from lunch get stuck in your throat as you were trying to question. No, I agree. It's unusual for me. I don't typically like preachers. I'll just say that. But I've got a few that I really hang out with. Ben's one of them. Mark, who he mentioned, another couple of guys, a guy named James and Kyle, but and then Patrick. But that's about it. But it's great to have people that understand. I said, it's lonely at the top, and I think that phrase is usually used in the context of, in sports or whatever. It's only at the top. People are trying to get to you and chase you down. But I think in ministry, it's lonely at the top. It really is. You're there to be the shoulder upon which everybody cries, and then on whose shoulder do you cry? And so it's essential to have people who understand the context, understand the situation, who are distant from the church, who can give you wisdom, can listen to you, can hear your confessions, can just pray with you and pray for you, and you can call and say, hey, look, I can't really go into this. It's a unique situation. I just need prayer. I'm struggling with some temptation. I don't want to go into it. Will you pray for me? Absolutely. It's essential to have that. And so we're very thankful to be able to do that and do that regularly. We have a fellowship that was meeting 3 times a year, about 12 of us. We get together and we call it Pastors Learning from Pastors. And so we'd have a couple people do some kind of little presentation. Then we'd have lunch together and pray together. COVID kind of hurt that, but we'll get it started back up once we get through COVID. But those are essential things for us to have. And we're very blessed to be able to do that with so many. As we talked about, we started this thing talking about how many churches, how many ministers, how many the Christian culture in our communities. We're still blessed to be able to have that. We're not out in Lone Ranger world. And we're unfortunately a lot of ministers are.
So who's the biggest knucklehead, you or Ben?
Oh, that would have to be probably me. Yeah, I'm a big goofball. I'm just a big goofball, and I'm always got something going. Ben talked earlier about pastoral ministry. I'm the guy who flies in and visits for like 15, 20 minutes and then makes jokes with the old ladies, and then I'm heading out. It's just my personality. And so Ben's got that, if he took one of those colored personality tests, he'd be blue and green, that whole relational, sit down and talk, try to figure out the problems. I'm red and yellow, man. I'm in control, and I'm hitting it, and I'm out. And that's me. I've always got something going, I would say probably me. Ben's much more serious. As you tapped it right. He's the historian. I'm the guy who comes in and just throws the quip in there from time to time.
Ben is very relieved with your answer because he thought you were gonna throw him under the Winnebago.
He's playing with house money now.
So Ben, do you have any response to that?
No, I'm a knucklehead in my own way. My wife will tell you that. I have a tendency to forget that I do have to sleep at some point in time, and that I don't need to do everything under the sun. So I guess in that way I'm a knucklehead. But I'm a big believer in the old adage that I'll sleep when I'm dead. But that's one of the things, not to get serious since Clint said I'm the serious person, but it was one of the things that interesting. John Owen, at the end of his life, it's one of the things he lamented is that he spent so much time studying that he never spent any time with anybody else. And that's something, again, is the temptation in ministry, is kind of crawl into your own shell, kind of crawl into your own little box and hide yourself, and not allow anybody access to you and things like that. I think it's something, Clint's a lot better at than I am about kind of allowing people to peek inside. It's kind of probably more a personality thing. I don't know all this, weirdo horoscope stuff he just talked about with colors and things like that.
Yeah, I didn't know this. I know this was an astrology podcast.
Yeah, it's disturbing that Clint knew that, no doubt.
Hey, I'm a jack of all trades, man. I'll surprise you at any moment. I just, I'm just a redneck who likes to read from time to time.
It's good that you read some. That's good. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, as we always knew it was going to be. Anything you all want to say? Any ARP stuff or information you want to impart? Anything you want to get off your chest, and anything you want to say negative about each other, or any questions you might have about the PCA or anything like that?
Well, again, Clint and I talked at length about this in the past, and it's becoming obviously more an issue as things kind of percolate in the PCA. But if I can make a plea to PCA churches who are thinking about maybe crossing the Catawba River and coming into ARP.
I like that.
Make sure that you're coming into the ARP to be ARP. And I don't say that to be mean or to be, to be provincial or anything like that. We enjoy being ARP, and we want everybody to be ARP. My goal is to have an established ARP church in the United States with a president who has covenanted himself to Jesus Christ and has signed a blood oath to the Messiah, the Prince. But like I said, it's a squirrely time right now in the reform world, and we want to make sure people who are coming into the ARP are coming in for the right reasons, and aren't coming in, to kind of come full circle here with changes going on in Clover. But we're all worried here about Yankees coming up from the north and turning South Carolina into another New Jersey. And in ARP we have similar concerns about PCA folk. We don't necessarily just want to become a smaller version of the PCA. We want to continue to be the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church.
But you haven't detected a flood of people incoming, though, I don't think.
No, and a trickle is perfectly fine with us.
Yes. So, Clint?
I think that the ARP is, we've been through some challenges over the last 10 years or so. One of the things that I've said is that I love the ARP of my youth. And I want us to maintain that. I think there was a very strong relational, familial feel to the ARP. Sometimes that, back to our discussion of discipline, sometimes that hindered us from being honest and having deep discussions and evaluating our mission and vision and evaluating the effectiveness of some of our ministries, just because we were so familial and we just got along. We said, "Oh, that's just so and so. That's the crazy." We had our crazy uncles. We had our grandparents. We had all these people, but we all just got along. We were a good family, and I think that fighting sometimes will take that away. And but I love that aspect of the ARP. I still feel it's there. I want us to. My goal for the ARP, and I'm on the restructuring committee. My goal for the ARP moving forward is I just want us to be faithful, and I want us to pursue excellence again. I think that one of the things that really has struck the church as a whole is we've gotten lackadaisical, we've gotten complacent as a whole, and I think I've been preaching through Revelation, and I don't know why I started it, but I did, and now I'm in it, and I got to finish it. But when you see Jesus, the Lamb take the scroll, you see the Father, the image that you have of the Father on his throne, and the elders bowing down the glassy sea and the rainbow walled room, and you just see that magnificent picture in Revelation 4 and 5. You just look at it and say, why are we satisfied with mediocrity? Why aren't we pursuing excellence in everything that we do? Excellence in our relationships, excellence in our discipleship, excellence in our giving, excellence in our ministry, excellence in our denominational life. And so, our theme at our church this year is fidelity and excellence. And I think that I would love to see us as a denomination get back to that. Let's be faithful. Let's continue pressing forward, and let's pursue excellence, and let's be as excellent as we can be, because God is perfect. And if that's our standard and that's where we're going, then we ought to start living it out on this earth. So that's my spiel at the end. That's my Coach Saban moment. So I'll end there.
Well, I can put you in touch with some consultants and coaches.
I don't need any of that.
From the PCA.
I don't need any of that.
There's a whole bunch of those guys. There's just a ton of them.
We got one called the Holy Spirit. Let's stick with him and let's roll.
That's right. Amen.
All right. Well, I was just trying to help, because
I appreciate that.
I hear a lot about best practices and things like that. We got some pretty big time high rollers that I could hook you up with, but maybe that's not what you need.
No.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful having you, Resby. You have any parting words for our guest, or any questions, or anything about killing squirrels or whatever?
Well, I mean, we've already talked hunting a little bit, but I always enjoy Ben and I's Twitter dynamic quite a bit, because it's one of those things where he seems to be awake around the same time that I am. So a lot of times our interaction sort of like starts and sets around the same time, but also there's literally no telling where we're going to go conversationally as it starts. So I know just putting in both of our Twitter handles into Twitter, which is essentially like taking your life into your own hands while driving on a South American road without a seatbelt. Aside from wrestling and NASCAR, which we've talked about, some of the bands we've discussed on Twitter have been his attendance of a Guar show, the Ramones, Working Man's Dead is a perfectly acceptable choice as a favorite Grateful Dead album, and the opinion of his, which I consider to be the most wrong, is he told me that he liked Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, the best. I find this to be just an egregious error, and if I was a communicant ARP member, there would be words with his session and perhaps even the synod about this just grave injustice of film critics. So that about sums it up.
Well, I have to say in response that, while thematically Jason Takes Manhattan is the best Friday the 13th movie, probably my favorite opening scene in a Friday the 13th movie, I'm pretty sure this is Friday the 13th number 3, it might be number 2, is when Horshack is walking around in the midst of a cemetery, and you get to hear the good old Horshack squeal as Jason grabs him and pulls him down into the open grave.
Well,
I want to say that's. I was going to say I'm pretty sure that's 3, and 3 was for a long time my favorite until everyone's favorite pandemic hit, and then my wife and I decided to watch through all of the Friday the 13th and all of the nightmares, because she had not seen Freddy vs. Jason, which was like a life-changing 2 hours for me in the theater. So we did, and I fell in love with Part 5 of Friday the 13th. Although I will go to bat for everyone loves Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, but I love Part 2. Just the cleaning the bedroom scene is outstanding.
Well, Resby, you'll be glad to know that I put Ben onto some of my favorite European crime dramas.
I've seen this.
We won't go into that because nobody wants to hear that. Ain't nobody got time for that.
This podcast has to end at some point.
That's right.
We do have to start
Yeah,
Thursday.
I'm not sure Mr. Clints is tied into quality '80s horror films as some people.
He's got this look like, man, I thought Resby was cool. We were talking about Romo. This was going so well, and then now it's just why did I come on here?
No, you can watch what you want to. No. The world's scared enough. I don't need to watch it on the big screen.
See, our theory was we were watching it because it was somehow encouraging to watch movies featuring characters who felt worse than we did early on in quarantine. So it was, we watched what was it? We watched Last Blood, the sort of finale Rambo movie, because it's like, well, he's having a way worse time than we are. I'm just sad because there aren't sports. He's literally being shot at in Mexico. And everyone's glad to not be pursued by Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger.
All right, Resby, well, tell everybody good night, and I'll cue the outro music. And
thanks again for everything, y'all. Appreciate it.
We'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much for having us. It's been great.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you to Clint and Ben for coming on. You can find Ben at WV Pitt on Twitter, or Clint at Cletus74. And we're at Presbycast, at Chortles Weekly, at Presbyterian. Thank you to everyone who supports us or who watches along, or at the end of the day, just who tries to start a fight in our comment sections while we do this, because that's really about the most fun you can have online. So as we hurtle towards the end of all things, or at least the end of this episode, we want to thank you for listening. And as you finish out your week, please don't be a nerdman.
The waves in me, that's why sometimes I think I'm wrong. But when I think I'm gonna sink, I raise my hand up high, and that great big hand of God comes down and takes a hold of mine. Moses and the Israelites fled from Pharaoh and his men. It looked as if they all would die, fear came on all them. But God spoke unto Moses, stretch your hand out on the sea, and he reached down his hand for them, and do the same for me. I'm wading through deep water trying to get home. The waves of sin may dash so high, sometimes I think I'm wrong. But when I think I'm gonna sink, I raise my hand up high, and that great big hand of God comes down and takes a hold of mine. That great big hand of God comes down and takes a hold of mine.
Magic on the internet worldwide.